This isn't just any fire. It burns within reach of a home already scarred by loss. A home where the name Emmanuel Haro had become a prayer, a headline, a plea for answers. But as the blaze swallowed the night, new questions ignited. What if the fire wasn't meant to erase evidence at all, but to pull eyes away from Emmanuel's case, to confuse the timeline, to scatter resources, to redirect suspicion? In a world already on edge, it was a theory that gained traction. Was this fire nothing more than a cruel coincidence? Or was someone trying to erase the final traces of a deeper truth? And why? Why here? Why now? Did flames rise so close to the very house under investigation? Before we dive in, thank you for being here with me tonight. If this case raised questions in your mind, or stirred something you're still trying to understand, drop a note in the comments. Share what you think happened, where you're watching from, or just how shaken this story has left you. Hit subscribe for updates as soon as they happen. Because this story is about to pull us into the fire. Jake and Rebecca Haro were not names anyone outside their small Texas community would have recognized. To neighbors, they were simply the young couple in the modest home at the end of the street. Ordinary. Quiet. Raising their baby boy, Emmanuel. That little boy, Emmanuel, was the heartbeat of their lives. Relatives described him as gentle, always drawn to music, his laughter carrying through the house like sunlight breaking through curtains. Neighbors remembered seeing him toddle in the front yard, Rebecca close behind, Jake often tinkering with the family car. Nothing about them seemed extraordinary until everything shattered. Because then, Emmanuel disappeared. A baby boy, gone from the home where he should have been safest. Search parties combed through fields. Flyers appeared on telephone poles. Across social platforms, strangers shared his picture, holding on to hope. The Haro family's story gripped hearts, but it also cracked trust wide open. How could something so unthinkable happen in such a quiet neighborhood? And who, if anyone, was to blame? The community, shaken and fractured, was only beginning to process that loss. When the night sky erupted in flames. It began on a quiet afternoon, the kind where nothing feels out of place. But inside the Haro household, safety had already slipped away. Emmanuel, just a baby, was suddenly missing. No sound of his cries. No trace of him in his crib. In a matter of moments, the Haro family's life tilted into what true crime investigators often call the golden hours, that fragile window when every second matters, when the difference between finding someone alive or only finding answers can be razor thin. The search began almost immediately. Neighbors banded together, combing through fields and drainage ditches. Volunteers carried flashlights into the night, calling Emmanuel's name into the darkness, hoping he might somehow respond. Law enforcement set up a command post, tracking every lead, every whisper. Then came the media. Local outlets broadcast Emmanuel's picture, his tiny face framed on screens across the state. And as the days stretched on, the case shifted from a desperate search into a community-wide vigil. People lit candles. Others tied ribbons around trees. Everyone asked the same question: where is Emmanuel? But before those prayers could even settle, another tragedy struck. It was late in the evening when the first shouts rang out. Flames leapt into the night sky, devouring the darkness with a sickening glow. A fire had erupted dangerously close to the Haro residence. Neighbors described chaos, thick smoke choking the air, the wail of fire trucks thundering down once quiet streets, the eerie orange glow reflecting off panicked faces. Some swore they saw sparks in the distance before the sirens came. Others remembered Rebecca screaming as she clutched her husband, the flames casting their shadows across the lawn. Firefighters worked feverishly to contain the blaze, their hoses cutting arcs of water through the smoke. Police cordoned off the area, trying to hold back crowds as speculation spread like the fire itself. And when the smoke finally cleared, suspicions only grew stronger. The investigation into the fire brought no comfort, only more questions. Fire marshals confirmed one thing early on: the flames did not begin inside the Haro residence. The Haro home itself had not been the ignition point. Instead, the fire sparked close by, on a neighboring property. To officials, that small distinction mattered. But to a community already steeped in suspicion, it raised a far darker possibility. Very quickly, three theories began to dominate the conversation. The first was the simplest: coincidence. Some neighbors believed this was nothing more than an unfortunate, unrelated blaze. Old wiring, dry brush, or a careless accident, the kind of fire that could happen on any street in America. But others were not so willing to dismiss it. That leads us to the second theory, the idea of a cover-up. Was someone deliberately trying to destroy evidence? In true crime history, there are countless examples of suspects setting fires to mask their tracks, arson used not just as destruction, but as erasure. And in this case, the timing was chilling. A baby missing. A community reeling. And suddenly, flames. And then, a third possibility emerged. Diversion. What if the fire wasn't meant to erase evidence at all, but to pull eyes away from Emmanuel's case, to confuse the timeline, to scatter resources, to redirect suspicion? In a world already on edge, it was a theory that gained traction. Across social platforms, people debated fiercely. Some clung to the official reports that the fire's origin was outside the Haro property, with no clear criminal link. Others were convinced that authorities were downplaying something bigger. And in living rooms, cafes, and church basements, the same uneasy question circled: who would set such a blaze, and why? Investigators said one thing. The public believed another. So, who was right? Across social media platforms, the fire near the Haro residence became the newest spark in an already charged case. Some users immediately pointed fingers at Jake and Rebecca Haro. They argued that the fire was too close, too timely, to be coincidence. They asked if the parents were hiding something, or if the fire was a desperate attempt to change the narrative. Others leaned toward conspiracy. They claimed the fire was staged by someone outside the family, perhaps to mislead investigators or to muddy the timeline of Emmanuel's disappearance. The theory spread quickly, each one feeding the uncertainty already gripping the community. Local media outlets picked up the story and carried it further. Headlines drew bold connections between the missing child and the sudden blaze, often before officials had confirmed any link at all. The coverage fueled tension, and with every new article or broadcast, the speculation grew louder. In the courtroom, the fire became a contested subject. Prosecutors hinted at its suspicious timing, but stopped short of declaring it directly tied to the case. Defense attorneys, on the other hand, worked to minimize its importance, urging the jury and the public not to get swept up in rumors. Meanwhile, the community fractured. Some residents gathered in protests, demanding transparency from law enforcement. Others held vigils, focusing on Emmanuel and the search for answers, fearful that the fire had already overshadowed the true victim in the story. The result was a town, and a case, divided. The fire had not only destroyed property. It had deepened mistrust, widened suspicion, and turned Emmanuel's case into something even harder to untangle. When the flames were gone, the ash remained, not just on the ground near the Haro residence, but in the hearts of everyone following the case. For the Haro family, the fire was another wound on top of Emmanuel's disappearance. Neighbors said Rebecca appeared withdrawn, her face pale at court hearings, while Jake often kept his eyes down, avoiding the press outside the courthouse. The tragedy had moved from search efforts, to speculation, to a storm of suspicion they could not escape. For the community, the fire became a turning point. Some residents said they no longer trusted official statements. Others felt their once quiet neighborhood had been transformed into a stage where grief and rumor played out side by side. Law enforcement faced new challenges too. Every update was met with scrutiny, every silence filled by public speculation. The fire, whether linked or not, created a cloud that investigators could not easily dispel. And yet, one truth remained. Emmanuel was still missing. The fire had not provided closure, only more questions. It left a haunting reminder that justice and clarity were still out of reach. The impact lingered well beyond the burned ground. Families locked their doors earlier. Parents held their children closer. And the Haro case, already heavy with loss, carried the added weight of suspicion and fear. Even now, the community is left to ask, was the fire truly separate, or was it part of a much darker story that remains untold? The fire may be one chapter closed, but the story of Emmanuel Haro is far from over. You'll want to stay tuned. The next milestone in this case is just days away, a felony settlement conference on September 16, 2025, followed by a preliminary hearing on September 17, 2025. The first real glimpse into the evidence that may define this trial's course. We'll be right here, bringing every update, every document, and every whisper from inside the courtroom, so stay glued to the channel. If today's episode raised questions in your mind, or stirred something you're still trying to understand, drop a note in the comments. Share what you think happened, where you're watching from, or just how shaken this story has left you. Hit subscribe for updates as soon as they happen. Because with a case like this, facts matter. Clarity matters. Emmanuel's memory deserves nothing less. The next hearing, it's going to bring us closer to a truth we all need to know.